distorted static and desperate alien vocalizations. Help, Prilorian, dying, need assistance. The garbled distress signal echoed across the galactic channels, a whisper lost in the cacophony of interstellar noise. A clipped, emotionless voice cut through the static. Prilorian distress signal, designated low priority, resource allocation insufficient, request denied. This from the Andromedan Collective. Then another equally detached, Prilorian system strategically irrelevant, no assets available, signal ignored. The Centaurian Concordance, but someone was listening. Aboard the Iron Serpent, a mercenary vessel of questionable repute, the same signal blared through the comms panel. Thomas Carter, ex-military pilot with eyes that had seen too much, swiveled in his command chair. His face was a roadmap of old scars and hard-won experience. He tapped a button, muting the insistent plea. Prilorians, huh? Jax, the ship's hulking weapons specialist, spat a stream of something foul into a nearby container. Heard they're about as tough as space dust. What's the take on this one, Captain? Substantial, Carter replied, his voice a low growl. A holographic display flickered to life, showcasing a credit value that made even Jax whistle. Anonymous benefactor. Wants us to solve a little problem they're having. Problem? Maria, the ship's navigator, arched a skeptical eyebrow. Rumor has it their atmosphere's going toxic, their resources are tapped and they can't fight their way out of a wet paper bag. Sounds like a dead end to me. And why us? Thought even the consortium wrote them off as a lost cause. Payment's good, Maria, Carter said, his gaze unwavering. We fulfill the contract, that's all that matters. He paused, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Besides, the Prilorians know exactly who they're dealing with. Word is, only the killer humans answered the cry for help. They know we get the job done. The bridge view screen shifted, displaying the Prilorian system, a once lush world now choked by a sickly yellow haze. Great scars of strip-mined land crisscrossed the surface, like wounds on a dying beast. Heard their biology's messed up too, Jax said, leaning closer to the screen. Something about their lungs not handling certain gases makes them real easy prey. So, we're babysitting a bunch of invalids on a graveyard planet, Maria muttered, adjusting the navigation controls. And getting paid handsomely for it. Something doesn't smell right even for us. Carter silenced them with a look. Enough, we're getting paid, we deliver. End of discussion. The Iron Serpent dropped out of hyperspace, the Prilorian homeworld looming before them, a testament to ecological collapse. Crumbling cities dotted the landscape, monuments to a civilization on its last legs. A fragmented transmission crackled through the ship's comms, barely audible above the static. Distorted voice. Help, please, but be warned. Humans, we know your history, your brutality, why you come now. The Prilorian voice, weak but imbued with distrust, continued. We do not trust your altruism. Earth's reputation precedes you. Approach with caution. Or face the consequences. Ignoring the warning, Carter gripped the arms of his chair. Prepare for atmospheric entry. Let's see what this problem really is. As the Iron Serpent plunged into the toxic atmosphere, the Prilorian transmission intensified, a desperate final plea. Distorted voice, turn back. We warned you. You will regret this intrusion. The distorted voice faded, replaced by the screech of metal against metal as the Iron Serpent bucked violently. Alarms blared, bathing the cockpit in a pulsating red light. Brace for impact. Carter yelled, wrestling with the controls. The ship shuddered again as automated turrets opened fire, energy bolts ripping through the already compromised shields. He slammed a fist on the countermeasures panel. Decoys, now. Flares erupted from the ship's underbelly, drawing some of the fire, but not all. A direct hit rocked the Serpent, sending sparks flying from the console. Shields down to 30%. A voice crackled over the comms. Ramirez, his weapons specialist. Carter gritted his teeth, weaving through the barrage. Evasive maneuvers. Get us down. He targeted the nearest turrets, firing a volley of plasma bursts. 2 exploded in quick succession, but the others kept firing. The Iron Serpent slammed into the ground, the landing gear groaning in protest. The ship skidded across the ruined landscape before finally coming to a halt, listing precariously to one side. "Report," Carter barked, already unstrapping himself. "Hull breach, Section 4, life support nominal. We're down but alive," Ramirez reported. "Seal the breach. Ramirez, raise perimeter sweep. I want eyes on everything." Carter grabbed his pulse rifle and jumped out of the cockpit. Reyes and Ramirez closed behind. The air hung heavy and still. Crumbling buildings clawed at the sky, their surfaces covered in a strange, pulsating organic matter that glowed with an eerie bioluminescence. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the hiss of escaping air from the damaged ship. Then, from the shadows of a collapsed building, they emerged. A small group of armed figures clad in patched-up environmental suits, their faces obscured by tinted visors. At their head stood a woman, her posture rigid, her weapon trained on Carter. "Humans," she said, her voice tight with suspicion. "What are your intentions?" It was Selene, her voice amplified by her suit's comm system. Carter raised his hands, pulse rifle still slung across his chest. "We received your distress call. We're here to help." Selene scoffed. "Help from humans? You are known throughout the galaxy as killers and scavengers. What is it you truly want?" "We want to know what happened here," Carter replied, his voice calm but firm. "We want to know what you're fighting." Selene lowered her weapon slightly, but her eyes, visible through the visor, remained narrowed. "This is Prylos. It is no concern of yours. Leave now, while you still can." She glanced nervously at the sky. "The air itself is poison to you." Carter noticed the Prylorians were moving stiffly, their breathing labored even with the environmental suits. He could practically taste the metallic tang of argon in the air. They were biologically weaker than he had imagined. "We have medical supplies, a breathable environment on the ship," Carter offered. "We can help you." Selene hesitated. One of her companions coughed, a rattling, painful sound. She glanced at him, then back at Carter. "One of my people is injured," she conceded, her voice barely above a whisper. "He needs treatment." Carter nodded. "Bring him." As Selene's group approached, Reyes and Ramirez kept their weapons trained on them. Carter led the wounded Prylorian inside the Iron Serpent. The ship's medical bay was small but well-equipped. Carter quickly assessed the Prylorian's condition, a deep laceration on his leg and labored breathing. "Argon poisoning," Carter muttered, injecting the Prylorian with a counter-agent. "Get him on oxygen." Back outside, Carter walked with Selene away from the ship, scanning the ruins. He noticed the drained energy conduits snaking along the walls of the buildings, the mutated plant life twisting in unnatural shapes. "What are these?" Carter asked, pointing to a cluster of pulsating purple vines. "Evidence," Selene replied, her voice hushed. "Evidence of the scav." "The scav?" "Parasites," Selene said, her voice filled with disgust. "They feed on our planet, draining its resources. They are pumping argon into the atmosphere, slowly killing us all." Suddenly, a high-pitched screech echoed through the ruins. A group of insectoid creatures, their bodies shimmering with chitinous armor, swarmed from the shadows, energy weapons raised. "Scav patrol!" Selene yelled, raising her own weapon. Carter reacted instantly, diving for cover behind a ruined wall. He brought up his pulse rifle and unleashed a barrage of energy bolts, cutting down the scav with brutal efficiency. Reyes and Ramirez joined the fray, their weapons spitting fire. The scav were fast and agile, but Carter's military training gave him the edge. He moved with precision, taking down the scav one by one, protecting Selene and her people as he fought. He noticed the scav seemed particularly drawn to the glowing organic matter on the buildings, often pausing near it before attacking. When the last scav fell, silence descended once more. Carter turned to Selene, his face grim. "What is that stuff?" he asked, pointing to the organic matter. "And why are you so worried about the atmosphere?" Selene hesitated, her eyes darting around nervously. It is complicated. Carter frowned. Complicated how? Selene sighed, her shoulders slumping. The Prilorians, we have known about this for generations. About the scav, about the Argon, but we are too weak to fight them. Our technology is failing. Our people are dying. Why didn't anyone else answer the distress call? Carter asked, his eyes narrowed. Selene looked away, shame etched on her face. They said we were not worth saving, too weak, too far gone. Carter stared at her, his expression unreadable. Take me somewhere safe, he said finally. Somewhere we can talk. Selene nodded, leading him through the ruins, deeper into the heart of the ruined city. As they walked, Carter's comm unit beeped softly. A coded message flashed across his visor. Secure artifact. Location, Citadel Centrales. The transport shuddered as it settled onto a cracked landing pad, choked by thick, luminous moss. Carter stepped out, the air thick with the cloying sweetness of decaying vegetation, cut with a metallic tang he recognized as argon. The secure location was anything but an ancient Prilorian research facility, swallowed by the encroaching jungle. Twisted metal frameworks strained under the weight of bioluminescent fungi, casting an eerie green glow. Sections of the structure appeared to be reinforced with some form of energy shielding, but even that flickered intermittently, struggling against the planet's atmospheric decay. Selene joined him, her multifaceted eyes scanning the surroundings with a grim familiarity. This facility was dedicated to the study of our planet's ecosystem, she said, her voice tinged with melancholy. Before the scav. She gestured to the riot of organic matter clinging to the facility. Much of the organic matter around this structure was under research at one point. Carter nodded, his gaze sweeping the perimeter, but his internal systems were already running diagnostics on the facility's structural integrity and potential entry points. He subtly activated his wrist-mounted scanner, cataloging energy signatures and material compositions. A flicker of suspicion crossed Selene's face as she watched him. We have limited understanding of the scav, Selene admitted, her voice low. Their biology is alien, their motives even more so. We do not know why they plague us. Carter, ignoring her comment, was already moving towards a partially collapsed section of the facility. He brushed aside a curtain of phosphorescent vines, revealing a darkened doorway. This way. Inside, the air was marginally cleaner, filtered by the facility's decaying systems. Carter moved with a practiced ease, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. He found what he was looking for, a hidden chamber, its entrance concealed behind a false panel. Inside, advanced scanning equipment hummed with residual power, casting ghostly light on banks of inactive consoles. What is this place? Selene asked, her voice echoing in the confined space. Carter ignored her, already interfacing with the equipment. The Prilorian technology, while ancient, was surprisingly intuitive. Within moments, he had located the artifact, a crystalline data storage device, pulsing with faint energy. It contained genetic information, a vast library of Prilorian biological data. As Carter began accessing the data, a tremor ran through the facility. Outside, the sounds of screeching chitin and snapping vegetation grew louder. Selene rushed to a viewport, her expression hardening. Scav attack, they are becoming more aggressive. They are targeting this facility directly. Carter glanced up, his expression unreadable. Why this facility? The organic matter, Selene said, her voice tight with fear. It acts as a beacon. The scav are drawn to it. She wrung her hands, but removing the matter, it would destroy the facility, everything here. Carter's mind raced, the artifact, the genetic data, the Prilorians' vulnerability, it all clicked into place. This wasn't just about securing a relic. This was about survival. This artifact. It's more valuable than I thought, he said, his voice low. It could contain a cure for their argon vulnerability. He looked at Selene, his eyes hardening with tenacity. We're retrieving the data and destroying this facility. Selene stared at him, her expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. Destroy it, but the knowledge, the potential of the organic matter. Carter met her gaze, his heart made. I wasn't sent here to save a building. I was sent here to help your people, and that's what I'm going to do. He ignored his benefactor's explicit instructions to secure the artifact intact. The screeching outside intensified. The scav were closing in. Download the data, Carter ordered, already moving towards the entrance. I'll buy us some time. Selene hesitated for a moment, her internal conflict evident in her eyes. Then, with a sigh of resignation, she turned to the console and began the download. Carter emerged from the chamber, weapon drawn. The facility's corridors were already swarming with scav, their chitinous bodies glistening in the eerie green light. He moved with a brutal efficiency, using guerrilla tactics to his advantage. He used the environment, setting traps by collapsing weak points, and using the narrow corridors to funnel the scav into kill zones. His movements were fluid and deadly, a dance of calculated violence. Each shot was precise, each strike lethal. Despite his efforts, the scav were relentless. They breached the facility's outer defenses, their numbers overwhelming the decaying structure. Alarms blared, casting the corridors in a pulsing red light. The download is almost complete. Selene shouted from the chamber. We need to go. Carter retreated, firing a volley of plasma bolts to cover their escape. He grabbed Selene's arm and pulled her through the corridors towards a predetermined exit point. As they reached the exterior, Carter set off a series of pre-placed charges. The facility groaned and shuddered, its ancient structure collapsing in on itself. The organic matter, the scav beacon, was being buried under tons of twisted metal and crumbling stone. Carter grabbed a sample of the organic matter as they fled, stuffing it into a pouch on his belt. Selene watched the destruction, her eyes filled with a complex mix of grief and understanding. As the dust settled, she turned to Carter, her voice tight with suppressed anger. Who sent you? Carter met her gaze, his expression unreadable. I was sent to retrieve the artifact, but you destroyed the facility. It was necessary, the scav. That doesn't explain why you destroyed it, or why you grabbed that matter. Who sent you, Carter, and what did they really want? Carter sighed, running a hand through his close-cropped hair. Someone who wants to help, someone who needs that genetic data to find a cure, the Prilorians and their weakness. It's of personal interest. Proof. Selene's voice was sharp, filled with suspicion. You expect us to simply believe you, that's some human benefactor suddenly cares about the fate of the Prilorians. She stepped closer, her large eyes narrowing. Prove it, Carter. Prove that this Thorn is who you say he is, and that his intentions are genuine. Carter sighed, the recycled air hissing softly through his helmet's respirator. Dr. Aris Thorn is a galactic xenobiologist. He spent his life studying species with argon-based vulnerabilities. He believes the Prilorian genetic makeup holds the key to curing other species of similar ailments. He paused, letting the information sink in. He contacted me, he has resources, he wants to help. Selene's expression softened, but only slightly. Thorn, she murmured, the name resonating with her. I've heard of him, a reputable scientist, yes, but why us? Why now? Still, a flicker of hope ignited in her eyes. Very well, Carter, she said, her voice still guarded. I will work with you, but understand this, I will be watching you, every move. They returned to the Prilorian settlement, the journey back feeling longer, the weight of their task heavier. The research facility was gone, leaving a gaping wound in the landscape and a deeper one in the Prilorian spirit. But the destruction of the research facility was only one problem. The settlement was in chaos. The air felt thick, acrid. The faint, rhythmic hum that was the lifeblood of the colony was now erratic, punctuated by coughs and labored breaths. Argon levels were rising, the scav's disruption of the facility having unforeseen consequences. Prilorians stumbled through the streets, disoriented, their skin taking on a sickly pallor. Selene rushed to a group of collapsed Prilorians, her hands moving swiftly as she administered a temporary treatment from a vial on her belt. The treatment was a pale green liquid that she administered through a small inhaler and seemed to provide temporary relief. "We need to stabilize them," she said, her voice strained. "This is worse than I feared." Carter, his face grim, scanned the perimeter. The scav attack had exposed weaknesses in their defenses. He barked orders, directing the few able-bodied Prilorians to reinforce the barricades. "We need a perimeter," he said, his voice cutting through the confusion. Now, leaving Selene to tend to the sick, Carter moved to the edge of the settlement, his rifle held ready. He scanned the horizon, his eyes searching for any sign of movement. He found it not above but below. He discovered a network of crudely dug underground tunnels leading away from the blasted remains of the research facility and into the surrounding hills. The earth around the tunnels pulsed with the same sickly green light that had emanated from the scav facility. He returned to Selene, his expression grim. "Tunnels," he said. "Underground, leading away from the facility." Selene paused in her work, her brow furrowed. Tunnels, scav, what could they be doing? Selene began to think aloud. Perhaps we can use something from the Prilorian archives to defend ourselves. Carter nodded slowly. Maybe, what do you have? Carter and Selene ventured into the scav tunnels. The air grew heavy, the green glow intensified. Carter activated his helmet's environmental seals, the filtration system whirring to life as it scrubbed the air. Selene, however, visibly struggled, her breathing becoming ragged, her movements sluggish. "We need to turn back," Carter said, his voice firm. "This is too much for you." Selene shook her head, her eyes filled with commitment. "No, I have to see this. I have to know what they're doing." Carter didn't argue. He knew that look. Instead, he moved closer, positioning himself between Selene and the tunnel walls, his rifle held ready. He would protect her even if it meant his own life. They moved deeper, the tunnels twisting and turning, the air growing thicker with each step. Finally, they reached a large cavern, the source of the green glow. A scav hive. The cavern was filled with scav drones, their insectal bodies scurrying over the walls and ceiling. They were connected to a network of pipes and tubes that snaked across the cavern, pumping a processed form of argon into the Prilorian atmosphere through a series of vents that led to the surface. Carter stared in disbelief. "They're not just exploiting them," he said, his voice a low growl. "They're trying to exterminate them." Selene gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "But why? What could we have possibly done to deserve this?" As Selene examined the scav equipment, she stumbled upon a small data cache. "Carter, look at this." She activated the cache, and a series of images flashed across the screen. "This organic matter, it's a neurotoxin. It's found in a common plant on another planet." "So?" Carter asked. "So it is deadly to the scav. If we had enough, we could wipe them out." Carter considered this, his mind racing. "We can get it, but doing so would require us to leave the planet, leave the Prilorians undefended." Selene shook her head, her eyes filled with perseverance. "I will not abandon my people. There has to be another way." Carter paused, thinking quickly. "Wait," he said, his eyes lighting up. "What if we could use the organic matter to create an airborne version of the treatment you were using? We could deploy it across the settlement, maybe even the whole planet." While Carter and Selene examined the organic matter, Selene discovered an additional data cache. She gasped, "Carter, look at this." They activated the cache, and a series of encrypted messages flashed across the screen. Carter frowned. "Encrypted, but the scav don't have the capacity for this kind of communication." Selene's eyes widened in horror. "They're being controlled," she whispered. "Someone is giving them orders." Carter began working furiously to decrypt the signal, his fingers flying across the console. As he did, a low rumble shook the ground. The lights flickered and the air grew heavy with the stench of argon. "Carter," Selene said, her voice trembling. "They're attacking. A massive assault." Outside, the settlement was under siege. The scavs swarmed over the barricades, their numbers overwhelming the defenders. The Prylorian cries of pain and terror echoed through the tunnels, a symphony of despair. The settlement's outer barricades buckled, groaning under the relentless assault. Energy weapons fire ripped through the makeshift defenses, turning plasteel and salvaged scrap into molten slag. Prylorian soldiers, their faces etched with terror, fell back in disarray, their high-pitched cries lost in the din of explosions. The scavs swarmed forward, their chitinous bodies glistening in the flickering light of burning structures. Carter, a whirlwind of controlled violence, moved through the chaos. He planted a magnetic mine on a support beam, the detonation sending a cluster of scav flying. He vaulted over an overturned vehicle, firing precise bursts from his pulse rifle, each shot finding its mark with deadly accuracy. He wasn't fighting for glory, or even for pay, but for the grim satisfaction of being the only one capable of doing what needed to be done. Inside the central bunker, Selene worked with frantic efficiency. The wounded lay scattered across the floor, their frail bodies racked with pain. She moved from one to another, administering emergency treatments, her hands stained with Prylorian blood. The air thrummed with the hum of failing life support systems, and the acrid smell of ozone filled her nostrils. Her eyes darted to a nearby console where atmospheric readings flashed a dire warning. Argon levels were climbing at an alarming rate. Carter slid into the bunker, his armor scorched and smoking. "They're through the perimeter," he said, his voice grim. "We won't last much longer if we stay here." Selene looked up, her eyes filled with despair. "Where else can we go? This is the only place with any kind of filtration." Carter ignored her despair, already working at a damaged communications panel. Sparks flew as he bypassed damaged circuits. "Got something," he muttered, his fingers flying across the keypad. A series of distorted images flickered across the screen, resolving into fragmented text. Scav comms, encrypted, but he worked with practiced ease, lines of code scrolling past his vision. Got a partial decrypt. The message was garbled, but certain words stood out. Overseer, Sector Gamma, eliminate resistance. The screen flickered again, displaying a crude map of the planet with multiple Prylorian settlements marked for destruction. "The Overseer," Carter said, his voice low. "That's their controlling intelligence. They're coordinating attacks on multiple settlements." Selene stared at the map, her face paling. "But why? What do they want?" Carter continued to work, deciphering another fragment of the message. "They're targeting Prylorians with unique genetic markers." Selene gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "The markers, the descendants, it can't be." "Descendants of who?" Carter pressed, his eyes narrowed. "The original scientists," Selene whispered, her voice trembling. "The ones who discovered the bacteria." "The solution?" Carter's gaze hardened. "They're trying to wipe out anyone who knows how to fight back." He stood, his movements decisive. "We need to hit them before they hit us. I say we go into the tunnels." Selene recoiled, her eyes wide with fear. "The tunnels? No, they're crawling with scav. It's a death trap." "Staying here is a slower death trap," Carter countered, his voice firm. "We take the fight to them, use their tunnels against them." He paused, seeing her hesitation. "Besides, Thorne sent me something useful." He tapped a data chip on his wrist. "Schematics for a temporary argon filter. We can rig something up to buy us some time." For the next hour, Carter and Selene worked side by side, their movements a study in contrasting styles. Carter all-controlled energy and brutal efficiency. Selene, her movements precise and delicate, driven by desperation. They cannibalized damaged equipment, rerouting power conduits and jury-rigging filtration systems. The air crackled with energy as they forced alien technology to work together. Finally, a makeshift argon filter sputtered to life, bathing the bunker in a sickly green glow. The air felt marginally cleaner, but the atmospheric readings remained ominous. Argon levels continued to climb, the scav were adapting. "It's not enough," Selene said, her voice choked with despair. "They're pumping it in faster than we can filter it out." Carter, ignoring her, was busy with a small mortar and pestle. He ground some organic matter from a luminescent fungi they had gathered from the tunnels, mixing it with a measured amount of water. "Time to try this," he said grimly. "If I can get this into the air, it should eat up the argon." He connected the mortar to a compressed air tank, and with a hiss, the mixture was launched into the air. A moment later, the bunker was rocked by an explosion. The lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. The air, already thin, grew thick with the stench of smoke and burning chemicals. "Carter!" Selene cried, coughing. "I'm all right," Carter replied, his voice muffled by the dust. He activated his helmet light, illuminating the chaos around them. A section of the bunker's ceiling had collapsed, exposing twisted metal and fractured rock. The argon levels spiked. Selene stared at the damage, her face a mask of despair. "It's over," she whispered. "We're finished." Carter grabbed her arm, his grip firm. "Not yet. We're not staying here to suffocate. Our only option is to leave this bunker and take the fight to them." Selene looked at him, her eyes filled with doubt. "But the tunnels are our only chance," Carter insisted. "We hit them hard, we hit them fast, and maybe, just maybe, we can turn this around." Selene hesitated, then nodded slowly. "All right," she said, her voice barely audible. "All right, Carter, let's do it." Before leaving, Selene knelt before a young Prylorian child, no older than 10. She pressed a small data chip into the child's hands, her fingers trembling. "Keep this safe, Alara," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "This contains everything we know about the bacteria, about our history. If anything happens to me, you must ensure it reaches someone who can use it." Alara nodded solemnly, clutching the data chip tightly. Carter gathered a handful of Prylorian fighters, their faces grim but determined. He checked their weapons, his movements precise and efficient. "All right," he said, his voice low. "We move out now. Quietly. Let's show these scav what happens when they mess with the wrong planet." With Carter leading the way, the small group of Prylorian fighters slipped out of the ruined bunker and into the darkness of the scav tunnels. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the oppressive silence was broken only by the drip of water and the scuttling of unseen creatures. As they ventured deeper, Carter planted improvised explosives along the tunnel walls, rigging them to detonate on a timer. He moved with a confidence that belied the danger, his senses honed to a razor's edge. Suddenly, the tunnel ahead erupted in a hail of energy fire. Scav warriors swarmed from the shadows, their weapons spitting bolts of plasma. "Ambush!" Carter shouted, diving for cover behind a fallen rock. The Prylorian fighters returned fire, their energy weapons flashing in the darkness. A fierce close-quarters battle erupted, the narrow tunnel filled with the sounds of gunfire, screams, and the sickening crunch of chitin. The ground vibrated. A high-pitched screech echoed through the cavern, bouncing off the damp walls. The ambush, a carefully laid scav trap, had sprung with brutal efficiency. Prylorian soldiers fell, their bioluminescent armor dimming as quickly as their life faded. Carter shoved Selene behind a crumbling rock formation, the air thick with the metallic tang of Prylorian blood and the acrid stench of scav pheromones. "Stay down," he barked, his voice barely audible above the chaos. He risked a quick glance over the top of the rocks. Scav warriors, insectal and relentless, swarmed the remaining Prylorians. Their chitinous bodies clicked and hissed as they moved, their mandibles snapping shut with terrifying force. The Prylorian energy weapons flashed, but the Scavs seemed to anticipate every move, their swarm tactics overwhelming the defenders. He grabbed Selene's arm, pulling her towards a narrow fissure in the rock face. "This way, we can't stay here." The fissure opened into a series of tight, winding tunnels. The air grew heavy, the smell of damp earth replacing the stench of battle. Water trickled down the walls, slicking the already uneven ground. Carter moved with practiced ease, his senses on high alert. Every shadow, every echo was a potential threat. He'd navigated worse in the ruins of old Detroit. Selene struggled to keep up, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice tinged with fear. "Somewhere safer," Carter replied, his eyes scanning the tunnel ahead. "Trust me." He didn't wait for her answer, pushing forward deeper into the earth. The tunnels twisted and turned, disorienting and claustrophobic. The sounds of the battle faded behind them, replaced by the rhythmic drip of water and the echo of their own footsteps. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber. The air, thick and stale moments before, felt strangely clean. The walls were smooth, worked from the rock itself. An ethereal glow emanated from the walls, illuminating the space with a soft, otherworldly light. Ancient Prilorian murals covered every surface. They depicted scenes of their history, their triumphs, and their losses. Warriors wielding energy weapons, scientists studying strange plants, families celebrating under a double moon. Selene gasped, her eyes wide with wonder. It's beautiful," she whispered, reaching out to touch one of the murals. Carter, ever the pragmatist, scanned the chamber for threats. He noted the lack of scav markings, the undisturbed dust on the floor. This place had been untouched for centuries. One mural, larger than the others, dominated the far wall. It depicted a ritual, a group of Prilorians gathered around a pool of glowing liquid. They held strange devices that emitted waves of sonic energy. "The bacteria," Selene breathed, her fingers tracing the outline of the glowing pool. "They used it to heal the land, to purify the air." Her finger moved to the device. "A sonicaster," she said, "an ancient Prilorian technology used for terraforming." Carter studied the mural more closely. Something was off. In the shadows, almost hidden, was a figure. Tall, gaunt, with elongated limbs, the Overseer, or rather someone who looked exactly like the Overseer. "Selene, look at this," he said, pointing to the figure. "This Overseer, he's not just exploiting you, he's suppressing your knowledge. He doesn't want you to remember this." Her eyes widened in realization. "He's afraid of the bacteria," she whispered. "He knows what it can do." Carter pulled out his comm device, his fingers flying across the keypad. He sent a coded message to Thorne, relaying their discovery of the sonicaster and its location. A moment later, a reply crackled through the device. "Understood. We have a sonicaster prototype in a hidden research facility, missing a critical component. Will advise." As the message ended, a deep rumble echoed through the chamber. The ground shook, dust rained down from the ceiling. "What was that?" Selene cried, grabbing Carter's arm. He didn't answer, he knew. The scav were collapsing the tunnel, sealing them in. A section of the tunnel behind them crumbled, blocking their exit. They were trapped. Carter turned, his gaze sweeping the chamber. His eyes landed on a small, almost invisible passage hidden behind one of the murals. "There," he said, pointing. "A way out, but it leads deeper into the scav tunnels." He looked at Selene, his expression grim. "Your call." Before she could respond, a scav warrior dropped from the ceiling, landing between them and the passage. It moved with blinding speed, snatching something from Selene's neck before disappearing back into the darkness. "My necklace!" Selene cried, her hand flying to her throat. The silver chain was broken, the pendant gone. A small, intricately carved piece of Prilorian art. "What was that?" Carter demanded, his hand on his weapon. "Data," she said, her voice trembling. "My research. Everything I know about the bacteria. I gave it to a child, for safekeeping." Without another word, Carter surged forward, diving into the passage after the scav. Selene hesitated for only a moment before following him. The passage opened into a vast, cavernous space. The air thrummed with energy. Scav warriors moved in organized formations, their weapons glinting in the harsh light. A cacophony of clicks, hisses, and guttural growls filled the air. It was a scav communications center. In the center of the chamber, on a raised platform, stood the Overseer. He was issuing commands to scav units, his voice amplified by a series of glowing crystals. Carter and Selene watched from the shadows, their hearts pounding in their chests. "Direct Unit 7 to Sector Gamma," the overseer hissed, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Eliminate the target, Prylorian child carrying vital data. The data can wait, that child can't." Selene's voice cracked, her eyes blazing with a fierce protectiveness Carter hadn't seen before. "Every moment we delay, the scav." She trailed off, unable to voice the horrors she imagined. Carter's eyes sharp. Selene, that data. It could hold the key to stopping them permanently, one life against the potential for saving everyone. She stepped closer, her small frame radiating defiance. "That is one Prylorian life, and I will not sacrifice it for a chance." Her words were clipped, sharp as shards of ice. He stared at her, the fire in her eyes reflecting the flickering glow globes. A muscle ticked in his jaw. He saw not just desperation, but a strength he hadn't anticipated. A strength born of desperation, perhaps, but strength nonetheless. He'd seen that look before in the eyes of soldiers facing impossible odds. "All right," he conceded, the gruffness returning to his voice. "We get the kid. Now." They moved quickly, following the scav's trail deeper into the tunnels. The air grew heavy, thick with a cloying, sickly sweet odor that stung Carter's nostrils. The tunnel walls, slick with moisture, narrowed, forcing them to hunch. A high-pitched whine, almost imperceptible at first, began to resonate through the rock, vibrating in their teeth. Selene winced, pressing her hands to her head. "The tunnels, they amplify their signals," she gasped, her voice strained. "It disorients us." Carter felt nothing, the sound a mere annoyance. He glanced at Selene, her face pale with discomfort. He wondered, not for the first time, what other subtle advantages humanity possessed, advantages they took for granted. A guttural growl echoed from around the bend. Carter raised his weapon, finger tightening on the trigger. Two scav warriors, their chitinous armor gleaming in the dim light, rounded the corner. "Flashbang," he muttered, pulling the pin. He tossed the grenade, a blinding white light erupting milliseconds later, followed by a deafening crack. The scav shrieked, clawing at their eyes. But even as they writhed in agony, Carter saw another patrol further down the tunnel turn and scuttle away. He didn't hesitate. 2 shots, 2 clean kills. The scav slumped to the ground, twitching. "They're alerted," he said, his voice grim. "They know we're coming." Selene nodded, her breathing ragged. "This way," she urged, leading him down a branching tunnel. "The scav. They prefer the tunnels they've carved themselves. They're less sensitive to the natural passages." The tunnels twisted and turned, a labyrinth of rock and shadow. Carter ran a hand along the wall, feeling the rough, uneven surface of the natural stone. Then he pulled his combat knife. "What are you doing?" Selene asked, her voice barely a whisper. Carter ignored her, hacking at the tunnel wall, widening a narrow passage. Chunks of rock crumbled and fell, dust filling the air. "Creating a shortcut," he grunted. With a final heave, he dislodged a large section of rock. The tunnel partially collapsed, a cascade of debris blocking the path behind them. "That'll slow them down." They pressed on, the whine intensifying until it felt like a drill boring into their skulls. Finally, the tunnel opened into a large chamber. At its center, bathed in the sickly green glow of phosphorescent fungi, stood a scav overseer. It held a small Prylorian child, no older than 5, suspended in the air by its telekinetic powers. The child whimpered, tears streaming down its face. The overseer's mandibles clicked, its voice a grating rasp. "Where is the data?" it demanded, its telekinetic tendrils tightening around the child's throat. "Tell me, and I will make it quick." Carter raised his rifle, lining up a shot. Selene grabbed his arm, stopping him. She pointed to a large, circular pit beneath the platform where the child was suspended. The pit was filled with a swirling mass of viscous fluid, dotted with writhing, larvae-like creatures. "An incubation chamber," she whispered, her voice filled with horror, "for their young." Carter lowered his rifle, his face grim. "Flashbang," he said, stating the obvious. I'll create a diversion, you grab the kid. Selene shook her head. No, the necklace. We need the necklace first. It's on the child. Carter stared at her, incredulous. We don't have time for that. That kid is about to be scav chow. He disregarded her, pulling the pin on the flashbang. This time he wouldn't miss. He hurled the grenade and leapt into the chamber, firing his rifle as he flew. The flashbang detonated, bathing the chamber in blinding light. The overseer shrieked, its telekinetic grip faltering. Carter landed hard, rolling to his feet. The overseer, momentarily disoriented, staggered back. Carter charged, slamming into the scav, his military training taking over. He dodged a swipe of its razor-sharp claws, delivering a brutal series of punches to its armored face. He risked a glance at the platform. Selene had moved, but instead of grabbing the child, she was reaching for something around its neck. Suddenly, a telekinetic tendril snaked out, wrapping around Selene's ankle. She cried out, yanked off her feet. The overseer, recovering from the flashbang, tightened its grip. Traitor! It hissed, its mandibles clicking in fury. You betray your own species. Carter, distracted, stumbled. The overseer disarmed him, sending his rifle clattering across the chamber floor. It raised its weapon, a bioengineered pulse rifle, aiming it directly at Carter's head. The scav overseer roared, hefting the weapon. Carter dove. The energy blast slammed into the tunnel wall where he'd been a heartbeat before, the rock face exploding into a shower of gritty debris. The air crackled with ozone. Selene seized the distraction. She wrenched free of the overseer's grasp, scooping up the child in a desperate lunge. Run! She yelled, already scrambling towards the tunnel entrance, the child clutched tight against her chest. Carter launched himself at the overseer, tackling the hulking figure around its thick, chitinous waist. They crashed to the floor, a tangle of limbs and snapping mandibles. The overseer bucked, trying to throw him off, but Carter clung on, his knife flashing. He stabbed again and again, but the blade seemed to glance harmlessly off the creature's armored hide. The vibration in the walls did nothing to distract the scav. It was completely unfazed. A dense fog began to seep from cracks in the walls, swirling around their feet, quickly thickening. Carter coughed, a raw, burning sensation in his lungs. He recognized the metallic tang argon. The scav were pumping it in faster now. A searing pain ripped through Carter's side. The overseer had managed to plunge a claw-like appendage deep into his flesh. He gasped, his vision blurring, and he slumped to the side, the overseer looming above him. A plasma blast whizzed past Carter's head, narrowly missing him. The overseer hissed, momentarily distracted. Selene stood at the tunnel entrance, her hands steady as she aimed a Prilorian energy rifle. She fired again, forcing the overseer to stumble back, then retreat into the swirling fog. Selene rushed to Carter's side, kneeling beside him, her face etched with worry. Carter, we have to go, the argon. It's getting worse, it will kill us all. Carter coughed, blood bubbling on his lips. He tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness washed over him. The data, we need the data. Selene shook her head, her voice urgent. The data won't matter if we're dead, we have to leave. Now he tried to push himself up again, but his legs wouldn't respond. Go, Selene, save your people, I'll hold them off. A lie, and they both knew it, her mind focused. I am not leaving you behind, Carter. We go together. She hooked her arms under his, ignoring his groan of pain, and began to drag him away from the incubation chamber back towards the tunnels. The child coughed, a harsh, rattling sound that echoed in the confined space. Selene's face fell. We're running out of time. Carter's hand brushed against the necklace holding the data. It was cracked, the delicate crystal matrix shattered. The data, it's gone, corrupted. As they stumbled through the tunnels, Selene spoke, her voice strained but determined. There's a legend. An old Prilorian story of creatures that consume the poisonous gases, filtering them, making the air breathable. Carter coughed again, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He gripped Selene's arm, his eyes burning with feverish intensity. We use the child as bait. We catch one of those scav, force it to tell us. Seleni's hand flashed out, a sharp crack echoing in the tunnel as she slapped him across the face. No, we are not sacrificing an innocent child, Carter, never. They emerged from the tunnels, blinking against the dim light of the Prilorian forest, but the air offered no relief. They were still coughing, their lungs burning. The argon had permeated everything. Carter's gaze swept across the clearing, landing on a patch of scorched earth where their ship had been. It was gone. In its place, several scav transports were powering up, their engines whining. Scav figures swarmed around them, boarding the ships. Selene gasped, her eyes wide with horror. They're abandoning the colony, the argon. It's working. They're leaving us to die. Carter, Selene, and the Prilorian child stood there, silhouetted against the dying light, watching as the scav ships lifted off, disappearing into the toxic sky. The silence that followed was broken only by their ragged coughs and the mournful sigh of the wind. Selene gently urged the child forward, her hand a reassuring presence against his small back. Carter, wincing with each step, stayed close, his hand instinctively hovering near his sidearm. The path ahead twisted, revealing not the verdant fields he'd imagined, but a macabre tableau. Bodies, gaunt and lifeless, lay scattered along the roadside, their skin tinged with an unnatural blue. Prilorians, young and old, succumbed to the insidious gas. The stench of decay grew stronger as they approached the village. Buildings stood empty, doors ajar, revealing interiors stripped bare. Those Prilorians still alive huddled in the center of the settlement, their bodies racked with violent coughs. Each breath was a painful struggle, their lungs burning with the toxic air. Selene rushed to the side of an elder, his face contorted in agony. "The argon, it's getting worse," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. Tears welled in Selene's eyes, but she quickly composed herself, her scientific mind searching for a solution. "There's still hope," she announced, her voice ringing with forced conviction. "The legends, the stories of the gas-eating creatures, they might be our only chance." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Doubt clouded most faces. "Legends, Selene. We need solutions, not fairy tales," one Prilorian scoffed, his voice permeated with bitterness. "But what if they're not just stories?" Selene pleaded. "What if they're real? We have nothing left to lose." A few, desperate for any glimmer of hope, nodded in agreement. Selene turned to Carter, her eyes filled with a mixture of grit and fear. "Will you help me find them?" Carter grimaced, his hand instinctively pressing against his wound. "I'm not exactly in fighting shape, but yeah, I'll go." He pushed himself forward, but a wave of dizziness washed over him, forcing him to lean against a nearby wall. The argon was affecting him more than he cared to admit. Selene gently guided him to a shaded area, her nimble fingers probing his wound. "You need rest," she said, her voice infused with concern. "Rest can wait," Carter retorted, swatting her hand away. "Those scav will be back. We need to find those creatures." Selene ignored his protest and began applying a poultice made from local herbs. The pungent aroma filled the air. "Prilorian medicine," she explained. "It will help with the pain and fight the infection." As she worked, they discussed the legend. "The stories say they live in the caves to the north," Selene explained. "Deep within the mountains, they are small, insect-like with glowing abdomens. They consume the gas, leaving behind only clean air." "Glowing abdomens, huh?" Carter chuckled weakly. "Sounds like something out of a bad Hollywood." "The legends say they are children of the mountain," Selene continued. "They are bioluminescent and live deep in the caves where they feed on a dense algae." The entrance to the cave system loomed before them, a gaping maw in the mountainside. The air hung heavy with a strange, sweet odor, almost cloying. The small band of Prilorians with them hesitated, fear etched on their faces. Carter stopped, his gaze hardening. "The scav will be back," he stated flatly. "They won't give up that easily. We need to protect the village." He turned to Selene, his eyes devoid of warmth. "We use the child as bait." Selene recoiled, her eyes wide with horror. "No, he's too weak. He wouldn't stand a chance." It's the logical choice, Carter insisted, his voice cold and detached. We draw them out, eliminate the threat, then find your gas-eating bugs. He's just a child, Carter. Selene cried, her voice trembling with anger. How can you even suggest such a thing? Carter's teeth clenched. Don't you start with me, Selene. I'm trying to keep you all alive. Sometimes hard choices have to be made. And what about your humanity, Carter? Selene challenged, stepping closer to him. Are you going to become the killer everyone believes you to be? Carter flinched as if struck. The weight of his past settled heavily on his shoulders. He looked at the child, then back at Selene, his expression softening. No, he murmured, his voice barely audible. No, I'm not. He turned and stepped into the darkness of the cave, his voice echoing back. Let's go, but we do this my way now. The air grew cooler as they ventured deeper into the cave system. Strange, glowing fungi clung to the damp walls, casting an eerie light. Unusual rock formations loomed around them, creating a disorienting labyrinth. The sweet odor intensified, filling their nostrils. Then they saw them. In a cavern bathed in a soft, ethereal glow, they found the creatures. Small, insect-like beings, no larger than a human hand, with glowing abdomens that pulsed with a gentle light. They were clustered around a patch of dense, green algae, their tiny mandibles working furiously as they devoured the substance. Carter stared at them, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and hope. Despite his injuries, despite the toxic atmosphere, despite the grim reality of their situation, he saw the potential. He saw the potential for salvation. The creatures, each no larger than Carter's fist, pulsed with a soft, internal light as they devoured the luminous green algae. Their bodies, segmented like terrestrial insects, were a mosaic of iridescent blues and greens, their delicate limbs moving with surprising speed as they scraped the algae from the cavern walls. A faint, high-pitched hum emanated from them, almost inaudible against the dripping of water. They consume the argon, Selene said, her voice hushed with awe. The algae thrives on it, and these lumen, as we call them, converted into breathable gases. It's a symbiotic relationship, a natural solution. Or it was. Her voice cracked with a mixture of hope and despair. Carter knelt, carefully examining one of the lumen. Its exoskeleton felt fragile beneath his gloved fingers. We need to secure as many of these as possible. Get them back to the village. They began collecting the lumen, gently coaxing them from the algae-covered walls and placing them into makeshift containers fashioned from scavenged scraps of metal and cloth. The creatures seemed skittish, their bioluminescence flickering erratically as they were disturbed. They're fragile, Selene, Carter said, his brow furrowed with concern. And transporting them. It's going to be difficult, especially with the scav crawling all over this place. Selene's expression hardened. We will weaponize them, Carter. We will cultivate them, spread them throughout the colony, release them into the atmosphere. Carter raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. Weaponize? I thought these were about restoring the air. They are, Selene said, her voice sharp. But the scav are choking us. We must fight back with every tool we have, even if that tool is delicate. Carter met her gaze, seeing the desperation etched in her features. He knew what it was like to be pushed to the edge, to be forced to make impossible choices. I apologize for doubting you. Lead the way. We'll travel at night, Selene said, her voice regaining its composure. Use the caves. The scav avoid the deeper tunnels, the ones closest to the catacombs. As they prepared to leave, securing the containers of lumen as best they could, a new sound pierced the silence, a rapid, clicking sound growing louder with each passing moment. It echoed through the cavern, bouncing off the damp walls, sending shivers down Carter's spine. Scav, Carter hissed, his hand instinctively moving to the energy pistol at his hip. A group of the insectoid creatures emerged from the shadows, their chitinous bodies gleaming in the faint light, their multifaceted eyes glinting with predatory hunger. They were drawn by the lumen's bioluminescence, their clicking mandibles snapping in anticipation. "Selene, get the child and get out of here," Carter barked, shoving her towards a narrow passage. "I'll hold them off." Carter opened fire, the energy bolts searing through the darkness, vaporizing the scav with sickening pops. But they kept coming, their numbers seemingly endless, their clicking growing into a deafening chorus. He used the environment to his advantage, taking cover behind stalactites, luring the scav into narrow passages where he could pick them off one by one. He risked a glance back and saw Selene, the child clutched tightly in her arms, disappearing into the labyrinthine tunnels. She knew these caves, knew the passages better than he ever could. Then the clicking abruptly stopped. Silence descended once more, broken only by the dripping of water and Carter's ragged breathing. The remaining scav had retreated. He retrieved the child, cradling him gently. He was unharmed, but his eyes were wide with terror. "It's okay," Carter murmured, trying to reassure him. "It's okay now." Then Carter saw it, the path Selene had taken. It didn't lead to the village, it led deeper into the darkness, into the catacombs. She had led the scav away, drawing them into the most dangerous part of the caves. A cold dread washed over Carter. He knew what the catacombs were. He knew what lay within. He had to save her. Carter grabbed the pulse rifle, its weight familiar and comforting in his hands. He checked the charge, the indicator glowing a reassuring green. Selene. The thought was a knot in his gut, a cold dread pushing him forward. He didn't have time to dwell on the why, only the how. He clipped a flash grenade to his belt, its metallic casing cool against his skin. Then, without another moment's hesitation, he stepped into the maw of the catacombs. The darkness swallowed him whole. His helmet lamp cut a narrow swathe through the oppressive black, revealing rough-hewn walls slick with moisture. The air hung thick and heavy, tasting of dust and decay. Strange echoes danced around him, the drip, drip, drip of unseen water, the skittering of unseen things, whispers that might have been the wind or something far more sinister. The beam of his rifle swept back and forth, painting fleeting images on the stone. He moved deeper, the silence broken only by the crunch of his boots on the uneven floor. Then he saw it, a nest. A grotesque tangle of organic matter plastered to the wall, pulsating with a sickly, phosphorescent glow. And scattered around it like discarded toys were bones. Small bones, Prilorian bones. A wave of nausea washed over him. The scav weren't just attacking, they were nesting, breeding, consuming. He pressed on, his pace quickening. He risked a calm check. "Selene, can you hear me?" Static. Nothing. He rounded a corner and froze. Ahead, in a larger chamber, he saw them. Selene, her face pale and streaked with dirt, backpedaled desperately, firing her energy pistol. But she was outnumbered. A dozen scav, their chitinous bodies gleaming in the dim light, swarmed towards her, their mandibles clicking in anticipation. Without thinking, Carter yanked the flash grenade from his belt, pulled the pin and tossed it into the chamber. The world exploded in blinding white light and deafening sound. The scav shrieked, momentarily disoriented. "Selene, this way!" Carter yelled, firing a burst from his pulse rifle to keep the scav pinned down. Selene didn't hesitate. She scrambled towards him, her eyes wide with fear and gratitude. "Carter, thank the stars." "No time," he barked, grabbing her arm and pulling her deeper into the labyrinth. "They'll be back." They ran, their breath ragged, the scav's clicking pursuit echoing behind them. The tunnels twisted and turned, a disorienting maze of dead ends and false passages. This place. Selene gasped, stumbling. It was sacred once, before the decline, a place of remembrance. Her voice was filled with a grief that cut deeper than any blade. They reached a wider chamber. In the center, bathed in the weak glow of Carter's lamp, stood a crumbling altar. Around it, scattered on the floor, were fragments of pottery, tarnished metal, and other artifacts. Relics of a lost civilization. Selene knelt, her fingers tracing the outline of a broken tablet. "There," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "A map, a way out." Carter moved closer, studying the intricate carvings. The map depicted a series of tunnels leading to a hidden exit on the far side of the catacombs, but something else caught his eye. A series of symbols etched into the wall near the altar. "What are these?" he asked, pointing. Selene frowned. "Ancient Prilorian it speaks of. Structural weaknesses, points where the catacombs are unstable." Carter's mind raced. A weak spot. He looked at Selene, an idea forming in his mind. "This isn't just a map, Selene, it's a weapon." He explained his plan, collapsing the tunnels to cut off the scav, allowing the team to deploy the bacteria effectively. Selene stared at him, her expression a mix of hope and horror. It's dangerous. The catacombs could collapse on us." "It's a risk we have to take," Carter said, his voice firm. "We don't have another choice." They worked quickly, planting the explosives near the designated weak spot. Carter set the timer for 10 minutes. "Let's move," he said, grabbing Selene's hand. They didn't make it far. As they rounded a corner, they were met by a wall of scav. More than they had seen before, their eyes burning with predatory hunger. "Damn it," Carter cursed, raising his pulse rifle. He knew they couldn't fight their way through, not with the timer ticking down. He made a split-second decision. He ripped the detonator from his belt, his thumb hovering over the button. "Carter, no," Selene cried. He ignored her. "Brace yourself," he yelled and slammed his thumb down. The world exploded. The ground shook, the walls groaned, and the air filled with the roar of collapsing stone. The scavs shrieked, their bodies torn apart by the force of the blast. When the dust settled, they were alive, but trapped. A mountain of rubble blocked their path, separating them from the exit. "We did it," Selene said, her voice weak. "We stopped them." But Carter wasn't celebrating. He could feel it. A tingling in his lungs, a metallic taste on his tongue. He glanced around, his eyes widening in horror. The collapse. It released the argon. "We're trapped in a pocket." Selene coughed, her hand flying to her throat. Her eyes rolled back in her head and she crumpled to the ground. "Selene!" Carter dropped to his knees beside her, shaking her gently. Her skin was clammy, her breathing shallow. The argon was taking her fast. He knew what he had to do. He slung Selene over his shoulder, her limp body a dead weight. He had to get her out. He had to find a way through the rubble, through the darkness, through the poison that was stealing her life. He stumbled forward, his muscles screaming in protest, his lungs burning, his vision blurring. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he couldn't stop. Not until he had saved her. Air. He needed air. Carter clawed through the dust and fallen stone, his lungs burning. Selene's weight was dead in his arms, her skin clammy against his. He stumbled forward, driven by instinct, desperate for a pocket of breathable air. The concentration of argon was suffocating. Each breath felt like trying to suck life from sand. He spotted it, a dark, rectangular shape amidst the chaos. A chamber seemingly intact. He kicked at a loose stone, widening the opening, and half-dragged, half-carried Selene inside. It was small, maybe 10 feet square, the air noticeably cleaner, less acrid. Still stale, but breathable. He laid Selene gently on the cold stone floor. Her chest wasn't moving. "No, no, no," he muttered, his voice raw. He pressed his ear to her mouth, felt nothing. He pinched her nose, tilted her head back, and began CPR. His hands pressed hard against her chest, forcing air into her lungs. 1, 2, 3. His own breath came in ragged gasps. He couldn't lose her, not now, not after everything. He repeated the cycle, sweat stinging his eyes. Doubt gnawed at him. Was it too late? Had the argon already done too much damage? He pressed harder, willing her to breathe. Then a cough, a wet, sputtering cough. Selene's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, filled with pain. "Carter," she croaked, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm here," he said, relief flooding him. He helped her sit up, supporting her weight. She coughed again, weaker this time. He pulled his canteen from his belt and offered it to her. She drank greedily, the water dribbling down her chin. Carter tore a strip of cloth from his shirt and began to bandage the wound on her arm, his touch gentle despite his rough hands. "Easy," he murmured. "Just rest." As he worked, a low, rhythmic scraping sound echoed through the chamber, the scav. They were digging through the rubble, getting closer. Carter's eyes narrowed. They're not giving up. He scanned the small chamber. One entrance now blocked. No other obvious exits. He needed a plan, and fast. We have to move. Now. He pulled the Prylorian map from his pocket, the fragile material crinkling in his grasp. The catacombs were a labyrinth, but the map offered a chance, however slim. He traced his finger along the faded lines, searching for an alternative route. There, maybe. He helped Selene to her feet. She swayed, still weak but determined. I can walk, she insisted, her voice gaining strength. They moved quickly, Carter supporting her as they navigated the narrow tunnels. The air grew thick, Evie, the walls closing in. The tunnels became increasingly narrow, forcing them to hunch over. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of their own breathing and the distant scraping of the scav. Then they rounded a bend and stopped. The walls of this chamber were covered in ancient murals. Figures danced across the stone, their bodies adorned with intricate patterns. Strange symbols were etched into the rock, glowing faintly in the dim light. Selene gasped, her eyes widening. The ancient ones. She reached out a trembling hand, tracing a symbol on the wall. This is about the bacteria. Carter frowned. Bacteria? Yes, Selene said, her voice filled with sudden excitement. They used it to purify the air long ago, before the cataclysm. She pointed to a specific symbol, a spiral within a circle. This marks a hidden passage. They searched the wall, their fingers brushing against the cold stone. Finally, Carter's hand landed on a loose stone. He pushed, and with a grinding sound, a section of the wall slid open, revealing a narrow passage. He squeezed through, then helped Selene follow. The passage sloped downwards, the air growing cooler and damper. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern, the air thick with moisture. Water dripped from the ceiling, and the ground was slick beneath their feet. This lower level of the catacombs was flooded. Water shimmered in the darkness, reflecting the soft glow of strange, bioluminescent fungi that clung to the walls and ceiling. The air was clean, almost sweet, a stark contrast to the argon-filled tunnels above. It felt untouched. They waded through the water, the silence broken only by the gentle lapping of the waves against the cavern walls. In the center of the cavern, a subterranean lake stretched out before them, and in the center of the lake, a large, pulsating growth of the bioluminescent fungi glowed with an intense, otherworldly light. It throbbed rhythmically, casting dancing shadows on the cavern walls. As they approached the lake, drawn by its mesmerizing glow, the water began to ripple. Something large was moving beneath the surface. The bioluminescent fungi pulsed faster, casting wilder shadows. Then, with a sudden, violent surge, something erupted from the depths, a dark shape lunging towards them, teeth bared in the glowing light. The water's surface rippled, then exploded, not with a splash but a violent, sucking breach. From the depths, something vast and slick erupted, moonlight glinting off scales the size of dinner plates. It was serpentine, easily 20 feet long, but grotesquely swollen in the midsection, its head a mass of mutated cartilage and teeth far too large for its frame. Bioluminescent fungi clung to its hide in pulsing constellations. Carter shoved Selene behind him, the metal of his sidearm cold against his palm, but he didn't draw it. "Stay back," he growled, already moving forward. He preferred a knife for this kind of close-quarters work. Selene, momentarily stunned, found her voice. "The fungi. Look." The creature thrashed, its blind eyes seemingly drawn to the patches of glowing fungus clinging to the cavern walls. It lunged, not at them, but at a particularly dense cluster, snapping at it with unnerving eagerness. An addiction. Carter sidestepped another swipe of the creature's tail, the air whistling past his ear. He closed the distance, a silver blade flashing in his hand. He moved with brutal efficiency, each strike aimed at a vital point. This wasn't a fight, it was an execution. Finally, with a sickening crunch, the creature collapsed, its massive body convulsing one last time before going still. Carter stood over it, chest heaving, a thin trickle of blood running down his arm where a shard of bone had pierced his flesh. Selene rushed forward, her delicate hands hovering over his wound. "Let me see." But her eyes quickly darted to the creature. "Wait." She knelt beside the beast, her fingers tracing the grotesque lines of its mutated head. "The bacteria, it's here." She pointed to a viscous fluid oozing from a wound. "Concentrated." He grunted, pulling out a field dressing from his pack. "Bacteria?" "Yes, look." She sliced open a section of the creature's flesh. The muscle tissue was riddled with white filaments, glowing faintly. "It's saturated, it must be, feeding on it." Working quickly, they harvested samples. Glowing fungi torn from the cavern walls, sections of the creature's mutated flesh, carefully sealed in sterile containers. The air hung thick with the stench of decay and the sweet, cloying scent of the fungi. "We need a lab," Selene said, her voice tight with urgency. "Somewhere dry." They found it tucked behind a waterfall, a smyn, cave just large enough to stand in. The rock was strangely warm to the touch. Carter set up a perimeter alarm, a series of pressure plates connected to sonic grenades, while Selene unpacked her equipment. Hours blurred into a frantic dance of beakers, filters, and glowing samples. Selene, her face illuminated by the soft light of her equipment, worked with a feverish intensity. Carter watched, his arm throbbing, his senses on high alert. Finally, Selene straightened up, her eyes wide with discovery. "Carter, I think I understand." She held up a vial filled with a swirling, luminescent liquid. "The bacteria. It thrives in argon, it consumes it." A low growl echoed through the cavern, not from the lake but from the tunnels beyond. The scav, they were close. Carter moved instantly, his face grim. They heard the commotion. He grabbed several large clumps of the bioluminescent fungi. Time for a diversion. He carefully placed the fungi near the entrance of the cavern, creating a glowing path leading away from their makeshift lab. "They're drawn to this stuff, right? Like moths to a flame." Selene nodded, her face pale. "Yes, but good enough." He armed the sonic grenades. "Let's go." The scav arrived in a chittering wave of chitin and claws, but they hesitated, their multifaceted eyes fixated on the glowing fungi. Then from the lake a chorus of screeches erupted. Smaller, juvenile versions of the mutated eel-like creature, drawn by the same irresistible lure, attacked the scav. Carter grabbed Selene's arm and pulled her towards a narrow tunnel, barely wide enough to squeeze through. Now, they scrambled through the darkness, the sounds of the scav and the creatures fading behind them. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, higher up in the catacombs. The air was slightly less dense here, easier to breathe. "Almost to the surface," Carter said, his voice strained. Selene didn't answer. She was already setting up her equipment, her movements precise and determined. She worked quickly, extracting the bacteria from the samples, concentrating it into a potent serum. "There," she said, injecting the serum into a small, sealed-off section of the catacombs. "It's done." A moment of silence. Then a faint crackling sound, followed by a rush of air. The fungi in the sealed section exploded in a riot of growth, consuming the argon, creating a small pocket of breathable air. But the rapidly expanding fungi threatened to block the tunnel, trapping them inside. The tunnel pulsed with an eerie, ethereal light. Bioluminescent fungi, thick as a man's arm, sprouted from every surface, their soft glow painting the damp rock in shades of emerald and azure. But the beauty was suffocating. The fungi spread with alarming speed, tendrils reaching across the passage, a living curtain closing off their retreat. "We need to move," Carter grunted, his voice tight with pain. He pressed a hand against his side, feeling the sticky warmth of blood seeping through his makeshift bandage. Ahead, a smaller tunnel branched upwards, a jagged scar in the rock face. But halfway up, a section had collapsed, a jumble of boulders and rubble blocking the way. Carter stumbled, his vision swimming. His wound was festering, the edges inflamed and angry. Each breath sent a lance of pain through his ribs. He was slowing them down. Selene, her multifaceted eyes wide with concern, ripped a glowing cap from one of the larger fungi. "Hold still," she murmured, pressing the fleshy underside against the wound. A wave of coolness washed over Carter, a momentary reprieve from the burning pain. But the relief was short-lived. A strange dizziness followed, blurring the edges of his vision, twisting the tunnel into grotesque shapes. What is that stuff?" "Anti-inflammatory," Selene said, her voice tight, "but it can cause disorientation." She tested his balance. "I need you to trust me." Carter swallowed, fighting the nausea. Trust. It was a currency he rarely dealt in. But he saw the persistence in Selene's eyes, the desperation to survive mirrored in her own wounds. He nodded. "I'll take point," Selene stated, hefting a jagged piece of rock. "You cover me." With surprising strength, Selene attacked the collapsed tunnel. Chunks of rock rained down, echoing in the confined space. Carter, his vision wavering, scanned the darkness, his pulse rifle raised. Each swing of Selene's makeshift hammer was progress. After what felt like an eternity, Selene cleared a narrow passage. They squeezed through, emerging into a larger chamber. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else. Something ancient. The walls were covered in carvings, intricate designs etched into the rock. They depicted Prilorians, slender and graceful, but these figures were different. They wore simple clothing, carried primitive tools. They were facing the same environmental issues, and they were moving to higher ground. Carter ran a gloved hand over one of the carvings, tracing the lines of a stylized fungus. "What is this?" "Our history," Selene whispered, her voice filled with awe. "Before the cities, before the technology, we lived in the caves." Another carving showed the Prilorians cultivating the bioluminescent fungi in enclosed spaces, tending to them with care. What for, Carter couldn't guess. Behind one of the larger carvings, Selene discovered a narrow opening, hidden in the shadows. "Another passage," she announced, her voice tinged with hope, "leading upwards." The passage opened into a natural cave, bathed in a soft, inviting light. A pool of water shimmered in the center, steam rising in gentle wisps. The air was warm and heavy with the scent of minerals. "A hot spring," Selene breathed, approaching the pool cautiously. She dipped a hand into the water, then brought it to her nose. "Sulfur, magnesium, other trace elements. This is incredible, medicinal," Carter asked, his head still swimming from the fungi. "More than that." Selene's eyes widened. "The minerals, they could stabilize the bacteria, prevent the mutation." A low, guttural hum vibrated through the chamber, cutting through their hope. The scav, they were close, too close. They bypassed the eels, Carter realized, his senses sharpening. Sonic weapons. "They're learning." He scanned the chamber, his mind racing. Time was running out. He needed to slow them down. "Help me with this," he ordered, gesturing to a pile of rubble near the entrance. Working quickly, they created a makeshift barricade, piling rocks and loose debris in front of the passage. Carter then gathered handfuls of the bioluminescent fungi, scattering them amongst the rubble. The slightest in more would trigger a chain reaction, causing a cave-in. "That will buy us some time," Carter said, stepping back to admire his handiwork. Selene, meanwhile, was frantically filling small vials with the hot spring water, carefully labeling each one. She then harvested several samples of the fungi. "If I can create a stable serum." The barricade wouldn't hold for long. They needed to move. Now, they pressed on, deeper into the caves. The passage sloped upwards, leading to another, larger chamber. As they entered, a wave of heat washed over them. The air shimmered with rising energy. They were at the base of a massive geothermal vent, a natural chimney leading to the surface. The vent roared, the sound echoing through the chamber, a symphony of raw power. A grinding crash echoed behind them. The barricade had fallen, the scav were through. "Now," Carter yelled, grabbing Selene's hand. Without hesitation, they leaped into the vent. A blast of superheated air slammed into them, pushing them upwards. The darkness swallowed them whole. As they ascended, their eyes adjusted to the gloom. They saw them then, platforms clinging to the vent walls, crude structures built from scavenged metal and rock. And on each platform, scav, their insectal bodies silhouetted against the faint light filtering from above. The scav weren't just hunting them. They were exploiting the planet's core, siphoning off its geothermal energy. They ascended, the geothermal vent a humid, sulfurous tunnel that twisted upwards like a petrified serpent. Energy conduits, thick as a human torso, snaked along the walls, humming with stolen power. Automated scav maintenance drones, spindly and insectal, scuttled past, their multifaceted eyes glinting in the dim, bioluminescent glow of the strange fungi that clung to every surface. Carter stumbled, the air thick with spores that burned in his lungs. The infection gnawed at his equilibrium, blurring his vision, turning the already disorienting climb into a nauseating spiral. The world tilted precariously. He reached out, expecting to grasp solid rock, but found only empty air. A wave of dizziness crashed over him and he felt himself falling, the vent wall rushing up to meet him. A Prylorian hand, surprisingly strong, clamped onto his arm. Selene hauled him back, her grip firm and unwavering. "Careful, human, the fumes are potent." He righted himself, his head swimming. "Thanks," he rasped, his voice strained. "Didn't see that one coming." They continued their climb, reaching a large, hollowed-out chamber at the vent's apex. The air here thrummed with power, the oppressive heat intensified by the constant hum of machinery. Before them sprawled a massive scav processing facility, a grotesque parody of industry carved into the heart of the planet. Geothermal energy, the planet's lifeblood, was being siphoned away through colossal conduits. The energy pulsed through converters, transforming into a concentrated form that shimmered with an unnatural, violet light. This energy was then pumped into thick, black pipes that vanished into the ceiling, presumably leading to atmospheric dispersion units. Argon, the silent killer. Scav workers, their chitinous bodies clicking and whirring, monitored the process with cold efficiency. They moved with a disturbing lack of urgency, seemingly oblivious to the plight of the Prylorians, or perhaps simply regarding them as irrelevant, an inconvenience to be eradicated. Carter pulled Selene back into the shadows, behind a cluster of pulsating fungi. "This is bigger than we thought," he muttered, his gaze sweeping across the vast facility. "They're not just draining the planet, they're actively poisoning it." Selene nodded grimly, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the violet glow of the energy converters. "They are accelerating the environmental decay," she whispered, her voice filled with a chilling resignation. She opened her pack and began setting up her portable lab equipment, her slender fingers moving with practiced precision as she prepared the samples she had collected. While Selene worked, Carter scouted ahead, moving silently through the shadows. He discovered that the chamber connected to a network of scav tunnels, branching out like veins and arteries, leading to the surface. The scale of the operation was staggering. He found a scav communications hub, a small enclosed space filled with blinking lights and chittering voices. He pressed himself against the cool metal of the wall, straining to understand the alien language. After a moment, a few words registered, translated by his implanted tech. Terraforming phase, atmospheric conversion, optimal argon saturation, Prylorian extinction. The scav's ultimate goal was clear: to transform the planet into a lifeless wasteland, perfectly suited to their own needs and utterly uninhabitable for the Prylorians. He returned to Selene, his face grim. "They're not just here to strip the planet," he said, his voice low and urgent. "They're terraforming it, converting the atmosphere to almost pure argon." Selene's hand stilled, her gaze hardening. "Then we must act quickly." She managed to synthesize a preliminary version of the serum, its color an unsettling shade of green. She took a sample of the mutated fungi, carefully placing it under a microscopic scanner. With a delicate touch, she applied a single drop of the serum. The fungi, instead of continuing to grow, began to stabilize, its unnatural luminescence dimming. "It is working," she whispered, a flicker of hope in her voice. "But it is only a temporary solution." She turned to Carter, her expression conflicted. "I must test it on a living subject, to understand the effects." Carter met her gaze, understanding the unspoken request. He knew the risks, but he also knew that time was running out. "Do it," he said, extending his arm. Selene hesitated for a moment, then injected a small dose of the serum into his vein. The effect was immediate. The disorientation that had been plaguing him receded, his vision cleared, and a surge of strength coursed through his limbs. He felt almost normal. "It worked," he said, a relieved smile spreading across his face. "I feel better," but the relief was short-lived. A sharp, agonizing pain erupted in his chest, spreading like wildfire through his veins. He gasped, clutching at his chest, his body convulsing. "Carter!" Selene cried, her eyes wide with alarm. He collapsed to his knees, the pain intensifying, his vision blurring once more. "Something's wrong," he choked out, his voice a ragged whisper. "It's burning." Selene frantically scanned his vitals, her expression growing increasingly grim. "The serum, it's unstable. It has triggered a reaction with the infection. It is accelerating its effects." A klaxon blared, shattering the silence. Red lights flashed, bathing the chamber in an ominous glow. "Intruders detected," a scav voice announced, its tone devoid of emotion. "Initiating lockdown." The scav had discovered their presence, alerted by Carter's outburst of pain. They were closing in, their chitinous footsteps echoing through the tunnels. Carter tried to stand, but his legs buckled beneath him. The infection had now spread too far, consuming him from the inside out. He could barely breathe, let alone fight. Selene frantically worked at her lab equipment, her hands shaking. "I need more hot spring water," she said, her voice desperate. "And more of the fungi. I need to stabilize the serum." But she was running out of both, her supplies dwindling with each passing second. They were trapped, caught in a deadly vice. The scav were closing in, their numbers overwhelming. Carter's condition was deteriorating rapidly, the infection consuming him alive. Selene was running out of time and resources. She stared at Carter, her multifaceted eyes filled with a mixture of fear and dedication. She had a choice to make. Leave him behind and try to escape, to warn the others, to find another way to save her people. Or stay and try to help him, knowing that it might mean the end for both of them, knowing that it might doom her entire species. Energy bolts ripped through the chamber, scorching the metal floor where they'd been standing only moments before. Selene, muscles screaming, dragged Carter behind a cluster of humming geothermal equipment, the air thick with the smell of ozone and burnt metal. "Hold still," she yelled, her voice barely audible above the whine of the scav weaponry. She fumbled with a hypospray, its vial filled with a luminescent green liquid, a modified version of the serum she'd concocted earlier. Desperation etched lines around her eyes. This might stabilize the reaction. Without waiting for a response, she jammed the needle into Carter's neck and depressed the plunger. Agony, raw, unfiltered agony exploded behind Carter's eyes. It wasn't the searing pain of the scav weaponry. It was something far deeper, a psychic assault that ripped him back through time. He was kneeling in the mud, the acrid stench of cordite filling his nostrils. The screams. God, the screams, children, a village burning. He saw his own hand, slick with crimson, clutching a discarded Prilorian doll. Its ceramic face stared up at him, accusing. He'd ordered the village see no and said. "Number," he choked, the memory a shard of ice in his soul. A guttural scream tore from Carter's throat, echoing through the chamber, a beacon for the scavs still hunting them. But amidst the mind-shattering chaos, Selene's eyes caught something, a series of intricate symbols etched into the casing of the geothermal equipment, almost hidden beneath layers of grime. They were ancient Prilorian glyphs, a forgotten language of connection, detailing a symbiotic relationship with the planet's own geothermal vents. Her fingers traced the lines, a spark of understanding igniting within her. The vents, she breathed, her voice trembling. The old tales, a bacteria, a specific strain found only in the deepest vents. It could neutralize the argon. An echo of a forgotten Prilorian legend, a whisper of hope in the face of extinction. Control panel, she said, her voice regaining its strength. We need to reroute the geothermal flow, introduce the bacteria into the argon stream. Carter, his body convulsing, his mind still trapped in the horrors of his past, somehow heard her. Through the haze of pain and memory, the soldier in him recognized the strategic imperative, the control panel, the key to survival. Do it, he rasped, his voice a broken whisper. Control panel. Get to it. They needed a diversion. Carter fumbled at his belt, his fingers closing around a pulse grenade salvaged from his gear. Primitive by human standards, but potentially effective against the scav's reliance on drone technology. EMP, he groaned, short range. Take out their drones. Selene grabbed the grenade, her brow furrowed in concentration. Too wide a range. It'll fry our systems too. She worked quickly, rerouting circuits with a small multi-tool, modifying the grenade to emit a focused pulse, a surgical strike against the scav tech. Modified, very short range, scav tech only. She looked at Carter, her expression grim. It will be dangerous for me. Carter pushed himself up, ignoring the white-hot pain searing through his veins. He positioned himself between Selene and the main scav advance, his body a shield against the inevitable onslaught. Do it now. Selene armed the grenade, her hand shaking, and hurled it towards the approaching scav. The world erupted in a blinding flash of blue-white light. A high-pitched whine filled the air as the EMP detonated, frying the scav drones mid-flight, sending them crashing to the floor in sparking heaps. The facility's lights flickered and died, plunging the chamber into momentary darkness. Now, Carter roared, shoving himself to his feet. Seizing the opportunity, Selene grabbed Carter's arm, half dragging, half supporting him as they stumbled towards the central control panel. Scav workers, disoriented and weaponless, swarmed around them. Selene snatched a discarded wrench and swung it with surprising force, sending a scav sprawling. Carter, fueled by adrenaline and the lingering effects of the serum, used his own body as a battering ram, clearing a path through the stunned workers. They reached the control panel, a complex array of glowing screens and pulsating conduits. Selene's fingers flew across the interface, rerouting power, overriding safety protocols, initiating the bacteria introduction sequence. But the effort was too much. The flashbacks intensified, the memories slamming into Carter with renewed force. He stumbled, his vision blurring, and collapsed against the panel, his body racked with convulsions. A high-pitched alarm blared through the chamber. The lead scav worker, recovering from the EMP blast, raised his weapon, its energy cell glowing ominously, and aimed it directly at Selene's back. Time seemed to slow. Carter, fueled by a desperate surge of adrenaline, lunged forward, tackling the scav worker, knocking him off balance. The weapon discharged, the energy bolt searing through Carter's side. He felt a sickening wetness spreading across his torso. Selene didn't hesitate. Her fingers danced across the control panel, finalizing the sequence. "It's done," she cried, relief flooding her voice. A network of pipes hissed as the bacteria-rich fluid flooded the geothermal vents. In the immediate vicinity, the air shimmered, the oppressive argon slowly being converted into breathable gases. But the process was agonizingly slow. More scav reinforcements poured into the chamber, their weapons trained on the control panel, cutting off any chance of escape. Carter, bleeding, barely conscious, his vision fading, looked at Selene, his eyes filled with a stubborn persistence. He had one play left, one desperate gamble. He coughed, blood trickling down his chin. Overload. "The core," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Chain reaction. Destroy the facility. Kill them all. Kill them all." Selene ripped a strip of cloth from her tunic, pressing it hard against the gushing wound in Carter's side. His blood, thick and dark, soaked through almost instantly. The air crackled with ozone and the metallic tang of spilled coolant. It wasn't enough, she knew it. Carter's eyes flickered, unfocused. A whisper escaped his lips, a broken litany of names. Then a memory slammed into him, unbidden, the sterile white walls, the screams, the faces of the fallen, all because of him. The tribunal. He was just following orders. Selene slapped him hard. The sound echoed in the confined space. Carter's head snapped to the side. "Stay with me, Carter. We need you. I need you. Remember the trust you earned." He blinked, confusion clouding his features. The core, venting it. "Impossible," Selene said, her voice tight. "Venting would release the remaining argon into the upper atmosphere. It would accelerate the planet's decay. This bacteria is our only hope." They huddled behind the geothermal control panel, using it as a barricade. Selene fired her modified pulse pistol, the energy blast scorching the walls as they forced the oncoming scav to duck for cover. Carter groaned, trying to sit up, but she pushed him back down. A guttural screech announced the arrival of the scav commander. He stood tall, easily 8 feet in height, his chitinous armor gleaming under the flickering emergency lights. "The atmospheric readings. They're shifting," the commander hissed, his voice distorted by a vocoder. "The argon levels, decreasing." From the commander's wrist launcher, a swarm of specialized drones detached, their metallic bodies glinting menacingly. They buzzed towards the bacteria clouds, emitting a high-pitched whine. Selene watched in horror as the drones began to disrupt the bacteria, their energy fields reversing the conversion process. The argon levels below, to rise again. "Number," she breathed, her voice barely audible above the alarms. "They're negating it all." Carter, his face pale with pain, focused his gaze on the scav commander. His eyes, though clouded with pain, still held a spark of the killer he once was. His armor, the central control nexus, just below the neck, it's a weak point, unarmored. He coughed, blood flecking his lips. Target that spot. Disrupt his command signals, before it's too late." He tried to raise his arm but failed. "Here," he gasped, "take this." He coughed again and a small data slate appeared in her hands, targeting data. Selene hesitated, her hand trembling. If she missed, it was over. If she focused on helping Carter, she risked dooming them all. Could she sacrifice one life for the chance to save her people? Her lips pursed. Her people needed hope. They needed to believe. She lifted her pistol, her movements precise and deliberate. Focusing all her energy, she used the data slate to target the unarmored nexus. With a sharp crack, she fired. The energy blast struck true, severing the commander's control system. The specialized drones sputtered and died, falling to the ground like broken toys. The argon levels stabilized. Seizing the opportunity, Carter, fueled by adrenaline, grabbed the commander's discarded weapon. Ignoring the pain searing through his body, he aimed at the geothermal core, targeting a critical overload point based on his understanding of engineering. "For what I've done," he muttered and fired. The facility shuddered violently. Alarms blared, deafening and incessant. The remaining scav, panicked, scrambled for the exits. Selene helped Carter to his feet, his weight heavy on her shoulder. "We have to get out of here," she yelled, her voice barely audible above the din. They stumbled through the collapsing facility, navigating the maze of corridors as the structure groaned and buckled around them. Finally, they reached a secondary maintenance tunnel, a narrow passage barely wide enough to crawl through. Just as they entered the tunnel, the geothermal core reached critical mass. The facility exploded in a blinding flash of light and a deafening roar, the shockwave throwing Selene and Carter forward into the darkness. When Selene regained consciousness, she was outside. The air was thick with the smell of burning metal and ionized particles. Carter was gone. She had no memory of their escape, of how she got here. The earth around her was scorched and lifeless, but near her face she felt a cool breeze. Kneeling, she took a breath and realized it was breathable. The bacteria had worked. A pocket of clean air. A small victory amidst the devastation. Then she heard the whine of engines. A single scav ship descended from the sky, its weapons aimed directly at her position. Selene tightened her grip on the plasma rifle, its familiar weight a small comfort against the crushing dread. The scav ship, a blot against the bruised purple sky, was descending. This was it. She wouldn't let them take her alive. She would sell her life dearly, a final act of defiance against the inevitable. Flashback. A young Selene, no more than a child, sat cross-legged before Elder Lyra, her mentor. Lyra's face, etched with the wisdom of centuries, softened as she looked at the bright, inquisitive eyes of her student. "Selene," Lyra said, her voice a low, soothing hum, "knowledge is our greatest weapon, but it is also our greatest vulnerability. The scav crave what we know, what we have learned over millennia. They will stop at nothing to obtain it." Lyra held up a shimmering crystal, a data storage device from a bygone era. "Guard this knowledge, Selene. Protect it from those who would use it for harm." The flashback dissolved as the scav ship touched down with a jarring thud, its landing struts hissing as they settled on the rocky ground. The ramp lowered, and scav soldiers emerged, clad in chitinous armor, their multi-jointed limbs moving with unsettling precision. They advanced cautiously, energy weapons held at the ready, their insectal eyes scanning the terrain. Selene, hidden behind a cluster of jagged rocks, took a steadying breath. She had prepared this ground. Small, almost invisible, energy tripwires crisscrossed the area. Pressure plates lay hidden beneath loose stones. She had used her knowledge of the terrain, the scav's predictable advance patterns, to create a gauntlet of death. The first scav soldier triggered a tripwire. A high-pitched whine filled the air, followed by a searing blast of energy that vaporized the scav in an instant. Another stepped on a pressure plate, unleashing a volley of sharpened rock fragments propelled by compressed air. The fragments tore through the scav's armor, leaving gaping wounds. Selene emerged from her hiding place, plasma rifle blazing. She moved with a speed and agility that belied her slender frame, taking down 2 more scav soldiers before they could react. Her shots were precise, targeting the weak points in their armor, the joints and the exposed sensory organs. A high-pitched buzzing sound filled the air. Selene glanced up and saw them, the tracker drones. Small, sleek, and deadly, they were equipped with advanced sensors that could detect her heat signature, her biosignatures, even the subtle electrical impulses of her brain. She cursed under her breath. She had hoped to take out more of them before they deployed the drones. Now she had to move, and fast. She sprinted across the rocky terrain, dodging and weaving, trying to throw off the drones' tracking systems. But Thane, air relentless, their buzzing growing louder as they closed in. Ahead she saw it, a dark opening in the cliff face, partially hidden by a curtain of vines. A cave. She had explored these caves as a child, learning their twists and turns, their hidden chambers. It was a long shot, but it was her only chance. She plunged into the darkness. Flashback. Selene, now a young woman, hunched over a holographic display, her fingers flying across the controls. Ancient Prylorian texts filled the screen, their cryptic symbols slowly revealing their secrets. "The old ones knew much that we have forgotten," she murmured to herself. "They understood the power of the land, the secrets hidden within the very rocks beneath our feet." She paused, her eyes drawn to a passage describing a hidden bacteria. "If we could adapt the bacteria, we could convert the argon." The buzzing of the drones grew louder. They had found her. Selene pressed herself against the cold, damp wall of the cave, her heart pounding in her chest. The drones were converging, their sensors pinpointing her location. She had to find a way out, a way to escape. She stumbled forward, deeper into the cave, her hand trailing along the rough stone. Suddenly, her fingers brushed against something smooth and metallic. A wall panel. She pressed it, and with a grinding sound, a section of the wall slid open, revealing a hidden chamber. Dust motes danced in the faint light filtering through the opening. The chamber was filled with ancient Prylorian technology and artifacts, shimmering crystals, intricate metal devices, and strange, unidentifiable objects. In the center of the chamber, resting on a pedestal, was a small, unassuming device made of polished obsidian. Selene approached the device cautiously. She recognized it from the ancient texts, a communication disruptor, a weapon used by the Prylorians in their long-ago wars against the Scav. It could generate a localized electromagnetic pulse, disabling enemy technology and disrupting their communication networks. She activated the device. A low hum filled the chamber, and the air crackled with energy. Outside, the buzzing of the drones abruptly ceased. They dropped from the sky like stones, their circuits fried. Selene quickly modified the device using her knowledge. She focused the disruption on the Scav's primary communication network. Then, seizing the opportunity, she rerouted the device's energy to boost a distress signal, broadcasting it across the void, hoping against hope that someone somewhere would hear her plea. The obsidian device pulsed with light and then began to crack. Outside, the Scav commander roared with fury. "Find her! Kill her! She cannot be allowed to live!" He ordered his remaining troops to storm the cave system, to hunt down the Prylorian scientist and eliminate her once and for all. Selene knew this was it. The Scav would not stop until she was dead. She was trapped, alone, with no hope of escape. But she would not surrender. She would fight to the very end. Then she saw it. A setting on the device she had missed, a way to modify the range. Selene quickly accessed the range settings, modifying them to encompass the cave system. The obsidian device began to emit a high-pitched whine. It was overloading. She set the device to overload, knowing it would destroy the cave and kill her, but disrupt the Scav, and possibly help others. It was a desperate gamble, but it was her only chance. As the Scav began to enter the cave, their weapons raised, their eyes burning with hatred, Selene activated the overload sequence. The stolen Scav transport bucked and rattled, its repulsor lifts straining against the uneven terrain. Carter gripped the control yoke, the alien symbols unfamiliar beneath his calloused fingers. The garbled distress signal echoed in his mind, a frantic plea cutting through the static. He pushed the transport harder, the Prylorian landscape a blur of ochre and crimson outside the viewport. What the hell was so important? A sense of foreboding tightened in his gut. Flashback. Selene's hands trembled as she reached for the activation rune. The device hummed, a low thrum that resonated through her bones. Her breath hitched. This was it. A surge of energy coursed through her, a searing pain quickly overtaken by a cold, resolute calm. Her fingers brushed the rune, for her people, for Prylos. Her eyes closed, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. She was ready. Carter slammed the transport to a halt, the vehicle skidding sideways in a cloud of dust. The cave entrance loomed before him, a gaping maw in the rock face. Too late. A blinding flash erupted from within, followed by a deafening roar. The ground bucked beneath him, throwing him against the console. The cave collapsed in a violent explosion, rock and debris raining down around him. He threw himself from the transport, shielding his face from the blast. The air crackled with energy. He had to get to her. Ignoring the searing heat, he scrambled towards the collapsing cave. He spotted her, half buried beneath a pile of rubble, her eyes glazed over. He hauled her out, adrenaline surging through him. She was alive but barely conscious. Then it hit. Not a physical blow, but a wave of disorientation. The Scav comms chatter, previously a constant stream of harsh clicks and whirs, dissolved into static. Their movements became erratic, their formations crumbling. The electromagnetic pulse. It had worked, but the respite was fleeting. A blood-curdling shriek echoed across the plains. The Scav commander, a hulking brute with chitinous armor, bellowed orders, his voice amplified by a personal comm unit. Heavily armored assault units surged forward, energy weapons blazing. Carter dragged Selene behind the wreckage of the transport, the air around them filled with searing bolts of energy. "We're pinned," he yelled over the din, his voice strained. "Their firepower is insane." He scanned the battlefield, his mind racing. There had to be a weakness, something he could exploit. He noticed a pattern in their energy weapon discharge, a slight flicker, a momentary disruption in the energy stream. It was almost imperceptible, but it was there. "Their energy weapons," he said, his voice low and urgent. "They're vulnerable to specific frequencies of electromagnetic interference." Selene's eyes widened, a spark of hope igniting within them. "The ancient texts, they speak of a mineral found in the abandoned mines to the north. It possesses unique electromagnetic properties. Can we use it?" Carter demanded, his mind already formulating a plan. "Perhaps," Selene replied, her voice weak but determined. "If we can reach the mine." "Then that's where we're going," Carter said, grabbing her arm and pulling her to her feet. "We're going to make a disruptor." Under the cover of smoke and the wreckage of the scav transport, Selene guided Carter through the treacherous terrain, the landscape a maze of canyons and jagged rocks. Scav patrols crisscrossed the area, their sensors sweeping for any sign of movement. They moved like ghosts, hugging the shadows, their every step measured and deliberate. They reached the mine entrance, a dark, gaping hole in the side of a cliff. A brief moment of respite, but Carter knew it wouldn't last. "They'll be here soon," he said, his hand resting on his sidearm. Inside, the mine was a labyrinth of tunnels and caverns, the air thick with dust and the stench of decay. Selene led the way, her knowledge of the ancient Prylorian tunnels guiding them through the darkness. They found the mineral, a shimmering, crystalline substance embedded in the rock face. As they began to extract the mineral, the unmistakable sound of scav footsteps echoed through the tunnels. "They're here," Selene hissed. Carter worked furiously, his hands flying over the makeshift disruptor. Energy bolts whizzed past, impacting the rock face around them. He ignored the danger, his focus laser locked on the task at hand. Finally, it was ready. A crude device, cobbled together from scavenged parts and the Prylorian mineral, but it would have to do. He activated the disruptor. A surge of energy pulsed outwards, bathing the mine in an eerie blue light. The scav energy weapons sputtered and died, their power cells overloaded. A cheer erupted from Selene's lips, but it was cut short. The scav, undeterred, unleashed a swarm of specialized seeker drones, small, insectal machines that homed in on electromagnetic signatures. They swarmed towards the disruptor, their metallic bodies glinting in the dim light. "They're immune," Selene cried, her voice filled with despair. "The drones are immune to the disruptor." Carter stared at the swarm, his face grim. The drones were about to overwhelm their position. He grabbed the disruptor, his eyes locking with Selene's. "Find a safe place," he said, his voice firm. "Now." "What are you doing?" Selene asked, fear etched on her face. He didn't answer. He raced towards the scav lines, the seeker drones following him like a metallic cloud. He reached the front line of the scav, they turned their blasters towards him, but it was too late. He activated the disruptor to its full power, knowing it would kill him, but hoping it would buy Selene and her people some time. The electromagnetic pulse erupted outwards, a wave of raw energy that vaporized the scav seeker drones in an instant. The scav warriors nearby convulsed, their bodies seizing as their crude neural implants overloaded. But the energy feedback slammed into Carter with equal ferocity. He staggered, his vision blurring, the pain searing through his nervous system. He managed a wry smile, a single drop of blood tracing a path from his temple. Then darkness. Selene watched, paralyzed, as Carter collapsed. The EMP had bought them time, but at what cost? A wave of grief threatened to overwhelm her, but she shoved it down, replaced it with a cold, burning tenacity. Carter's sacrifice had cleared the path. It was time. Prylos will not fall. Selene's voice, amplified by the scav's own communication system, cut through the stunned silence. "He gave everything. Now we take back our world, deploy the bacteria. Now, the Prilorians, jolted from their despair, moved with a newfound urgency. They knew what to do. They had prepared for this moment. Flashback. Selene hunched over ancient texts, her face illuminated by the holographic glow. The ancients spoke of a bacteria, she murmured, dormant within the planet's core. In concentrated doses, it possesses a unique property. It metabolizes argon, converting it into breathable oxygen. It's a terraforming agent. The Prilorians, using repurposed scav atmospheric distribution systems, began releasing the bacteria into the atmosphere. The effect was immediate. The sickly yellow haze began to dissipate, replaced by a faint, ethereal blue. Argon levels plummeted. The scav, weakened and disoriented by the environmental shift, descended into chaos. They turned on each other, clawing and biting, fighting for the dwindling pockets of oxygen. Their bodies, designed to thrive in an argon-rich environment, were failing. As the bacteria worked its magic, the Prilorians began to recover. They coughed, gasped, and then they breathed. Deeper, fuller breaths than they had taken in generations. Children laughed, their faces flushed with color. The crops, starved of oxygen, began to sprout anew. Selene knelt beside Carter's lifeless form, her heart aching. "You showed us," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You showed us that even killers can be heroes, that humanity is not what we thought." A formal message, encoded with Prilorian symbols and human characters, was transmitted to Earth. "To the people of Earth, we thank you. One of your warriors, Thomas Carter, gave his life to save ours. His bravery will not be forgotten. Know that humanity has earned a debt of gratitude from the Prilorian people." Light years away, on the Galactic Council's observation platform, the assembled dignitaries watched the unfolding events with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The Scav Armada defeated. The Prilorian atmosphere revitalizing. Humanity, the species they had written off as barbaric, had accomplished the impossible. A ripple of murmurs spread through the chamber. The narrative had changed. Years passed. The Prilorians adapted to their new environment, their ingenuity and resilience shining brighter than ever. They built new cities, cultivated new crops, and forged a new future. Selene, now a respected leader, guided her people with wisdom and compassion. She never forgot Carter's sacrifice, nor the lesson he had taught her about the complexities of humanity. On a windswept hill overlooking the revitalized Prilorian capital, a memorial was erected. A simple stone obelisk, etched with the image of a human warrior, his face etched with tenacity. It stood as a testament to Carter's sacrifice, and a symbol of humanity's capacity for compassion, even in the face of overwhelming darkness. And then they came. Ships from across the galaxy, drawn by the Prilorians' newfound prosperity and their reputation for kindness. They came seeking help, seeking knowledge, seeking connection. The Prilorians, remembering their own desperate plea for assistance, welcomed them with open arms.